Welcome to More Than Words, a podcast about treating the whole child, brought to you by the Reading and Language Learning Center. I'm your host, Tristan, and today I'm joined by educational psychologist and cognitive neuroscientist, Dr. Layne Kalbfleisch, to discuss stealth dyslexia. Hi, Dr. K. How are you doing?
Hi, how are you this morning?
Very, very excited for you to be here. Very good. How are you?
Same. I'm well, thank you. I'm excited to have this conversation.
Yeah, this is going to be awesome. For those who may not have heard, we had Dr. Kalbfleisch on an episode a couple months back, and it was amazing. We had a discussion about unmasking. So if you have not checked that out, please feel free to do so. But let's have you introduce yourself again, just in case people do not know who you are, you wonderful human.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm Dr. Layne Kalbfleisch, and I have a practice called 2E Consults, LLC. 2E Consults, that is shorthand 2E for twice exceptional. And what I do is serve families and children across the lifespan that need help with these kinds of issues tied to twice exceptionality, having superior abilities, but then either learning or psychiatric conditions. This takes the form of psychoeducational evaluation, coaching, social skills or assistive technology, and staff developments for clinical staffs and schools. The informal way that I describe what I do is that it's really helping understand what's going on with someone from the inside out, and then fitting or matching what's happening from the outside in.
That's awesome. And yeah, I mean, it sounds amazing. It sounds very rewarding. And if people were looking to find you guys, where would they go?
Sure. On the web, it's www.the2e.com. I have offices in New Mexico and Virginia. In Virginia, I'm at 12020 Sunrise Valley Road in Reston. And in New Mexico, I'm in a town about 45 minutes north of Santa Fe called Espanola. And that office sits nested among the 8 northern pueblos.
Very cool.
Country. Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, well, I'll make sure to pop that all in the show notes so that folks can find you in whatever part of the country they're in. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, I see clients all over the United States. So my physical boundaries and settings are life pre and post COVID, but I have clients all over the United States.
Awesome. Okay, perfect. Well, we're talking about stealth dyslexia today, and this is something I think people have never heard of, as opposed to dyslexia. You know what I mean? So let's jump into it. What is stealth dyslexia? And then why is it different?
Sure, absolutely. So, a more classic definition of dyslexia that comes from the International Dyslexia Association is that it's a specific learning disability characterized by difficulties with fluent word recognition, poor spelling and decoding, problems with comprehension. Reading is not their favorite thing to do.
Right.
But in stealth dyslexia, actually, kids with stealth dyslexia can be avid readers. They can really enjoy the reading process. But where you see the differences are that compared to a really elegant, beautiful verbal IQ, their word processing, their written output looks completely different. You may see dysgraphia, you may see really, less mature thinking produced from their hand than what comes out of their mouth verbally. They may have some visual and spatial issues. And as you can imagine, it's stealth because it kind of flies under the radar.
Right.
And I also have to mention, this is not my term. Stealth dyslexia was coined by Brock and Fernette Eide, who are MDs in the Seattle area, who kept seeing this pattern in bright kids. And they are the ones that termed stealth dyslexia.
Okay.
But it's a condition that often is masked. And as you mentioned in the previous podcast on unmasking, this is a classic situation of masking for gifted children who are struggling in the classroom and really do not realize that they are smart.
Very interesting. So you touched on a couple of them, but what are the red flags for stealth dyslexia as opposed to those for just dyslexia.
Right. Yeah. So I mentioned kind of the formal learning red flags,
Right.
the spelling, the writing, the output doesn't match what a person is giving verbally and what they
Right.
can do. In young kids, they may be avid readers, and of course, you wouldn't think an avid reader would have any processing issues as well.
Right.
Red flags in older kids, when it's undiagnosed, it looks like inattention. I get a lot of kids coming in and questions about inattention and distractibility. And again, in the unmasking paradigm, inattention and hyperactivity can come from so many different things.
I was going to ask. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm always about the why. Okay, general attention is the world. Well, let's get more specific. And so you really have to look carefully. And yeah. So when it's a general attention issue, learning, self-esteem issue in a middle school kid or a high school kid, that's often one of the things that I'm really looking for and hunting for in the testing.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So when, let's say a teacher, is looking at one of their students, one kid they know has dyslexia and they've seen all the red flags and they went through it and they're like, okay, makes sense. They got the diagnosis and they were able to recognize that, but they have another kid that's struggling and it's stealth dyslexia, but they don't know what are the things, like how does it manifest in the classroom, and how can teachers recognize it?
Sure. I may tell you a quick story to illustrate that.
That'd be great.
One of the 2 case studies in the unmasking chapter in my book, Teaching to Every Kid's Potential, Simple Neuroscience Lessons to Liberate Learners. That's a mouthful. But one case study is on autism spectrum, and the other one is on a middle school student with stealth dyslexia. And this comes from, 2 cases that happened fairly close to each other. And I kind of created the braid of the 2. But there were kiddos in middle school in the metro area and very, very smart, but having a lot of trouble with distractibility, with written output, missed assignments, late assignments. Right. Turns out this kiddo had stealth dyslexia, but the English teacher is saying, but they are so smart. And how could they be having a problem with dyslexia? Well, the other classroom, kind of reverse engineering, how did we know? He was in a class with 34 kids, and I went to that class.
Oh my gosh.
And it was loud. 34 middle schoolers in one classroom. Even when it's calm, it's still, there's a level of noise. Yeah. So this was a kiddo who was really sensitive to noise, trying to leave the class, really to get away from the noise, the sensory overload. The other cardinal thing was that here's a really smart kiddo who is not really pestering the teacher, but very reliant on a core group of friends to translate for them. Yeah. And so you would see, even when the work wasn't group work, when it was, amen, because then the translation was there and the extra repetition and help. But when not, you might see this kiddo at inappropriate times pulling on the sleeve of their neighbor. And again, you don't expect that kind of behavior from someone who's really, really smart.
Right. Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so if the teacher can maybe recognize that and talk to someone at home, but let's say the parent or the teacher hasn't been noticed anything, but the parent is seeing struggles at home. What do things at home look like? Maybe not necessarily homework related.
Right. School refusal, anxiety. I don't want to go to school. I don't feel well today. Again, coming from a really bright, gifted student, that isn't a typical stance. Right. Behavioral issues at night, don't want to do homework, immaturity, meltdowns, tantrums. Right. These are not kiddos on the autism spectrum. And yet after 4:00 in the afternoon, there's a shift. Yeah. And parents, are racking their brains for what's happening. And a lot of times it's something like this processing that's really subtle. And 9 times out of 10 in the kids I've seen, stealth dyslexia is usually what has explanatory power.
Interesting. So do kids get misdiagnosed all the time? Because when you first said inattention, I was like, someone's going to label that as ADHD and like run with it.
Exactly. And, and that's a surface level characteristic, and they may only get so far.
Yeah.
I ask parents all the time if they're coming in with previous diagnoses. Okay, what are you doing? Sometimes there's medicine. Sometimes it's a lot of behavioral coaching and strategies. And I always say, is what you're doing helping? And you hear this, sort of, I'm not sure. How do I know, Dr. K, if the medicine is working? And they're shrugging their shoulders. And I'm like, oh boy, we have some work to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the general attention, I think, is what typically gets diagnosed.
Yeah.
When I read reports that have been done previous to my evaluations, you might see a hint of it. There will be a sentence that says something about, something's off, phonological memory, or one of the deeper language processing. And yet everything else looks really good. The achievement looks high, the IQ looks high. And so people just tend to dismiss it and say it's there, but nothing's happening. So, and it doesn't really emerge and become a big thing until middle high school.
Right.
Because assignments get bigger.
Oh, yeah.
The print gets smaller. The expectations for comprehension become more complex.
Yeah.
And so then you have these smart kids who think they're not smart.
Yeah.
They're having self-esteem issues. They're having school refusal and anxiety. Right. And parents are thinking, what in the world is going on?
Yeah. So how do you end up getting that proper diagnosis if people sometimes they're like, well, one thing's off, but it's fine?
Right. I always look at, the deep language skills, how those shake out. What does phonological processing look like? What does phonological memory look like? What does rapid naming look like? Because rapid naming deficit is its own subtype of dyslexia. And whenever I see those, but everything else looks pretty good, I stop and I reverse and I go back and, do the subtractions on the score counts. How big are these discrepancies? And of course, to be diagnosable as learning disability, there has to be a certain level of discrepancy.
Right.
So, yeah. So I'm always looking for the why. And if the why is showing up symptomatically in psychiatric screeners, that's one. But if you go into the deep language processing skills and any of those are low, then that's usually ding, ding, there's a stealth dyslexia here. And no wonder this kid feels a bit terrorized.
Right. Exactly.
Because they're used to things coming easily. And all of a sudden there's something puts on the brakes in their brain. And the kids always think, what's wrong with me? That's the first, what's the matter? It must be me.
Right.
And it's bad that we don't see it until it kind of mushrooms a bit.
Right. So what age is our students normally getting diagnosed?
I see it in middle and high schoolers.
Okay.
Or like middle schoolers becoming high schoolers. That's usually when parents, get the tip from school or are tired of seeing behaviors and struggles with tutors and medicine. And they say, there has to be something else. What are we missing? Yeah. And my whole practice is predicated on really getting to the right root of the problem and unmasking. And so those are the people that tend to find themselves, at my door of, we have a mountain of paperwork, things are marginally improving or they're not, what could this be?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
this is one of the possibilities.
Right. And that's older than most of the dyslexia diagnoses, because a lot of the kids that even we see at RLC tend to be I don't know, third grade, because that's when a lot of kids hit that wall where they can't remember any more vocab words and things to just stick stick in their memory somewhere. It's like, it's too full.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So just interesting, the age difference between the two.
It is, well, the brain compensates in
Right.
elementary age. There's enough going on in the brain to help do other things.
Yeah.
Dyslexics are famous contextual readers.
Mm.
Don't do well on multiple choice because multiple choice scales back the deeper context.
Right.
So even kids who are good at memorizing things, they will just create visual recognition and do it that way.
Right.
I've worked with a couple of kids who are, they're actors, they're on the stage and they do quite well. And yet they have dyslexia or stealth dyslexia. And so young enough, the language is spread out and basic enough that they kind of grab on at their own pace, and their brain is smart in other ways. But as things become more complex and deep in terms of assignments and curriculum and concepts, then they run out of gas.
Oh yeah. I mean, I can only imagine. I remember when I took, I guess, one of my first like pre-AP classes or AP classes, I think it was AP history, and the textbook was massive. And like you said, the print was so tiny. And every night it was like, read this whole chapter. And like, here's a couple pages where you need to put like every note that you could ever think of into the little box. And you're like, oh,
right.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a little bit terrorizing for kids that have this, because they're used to cruising along at a pretty good clip.
Right.
And then the context changes, but they don't. And that's where I'm not smart. I've seen kids with IQs in the clouds who really believe they are not smart.
Oh.
And usually this is what's going on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what do parents do for their kids once they've gotten like this diagnosis?
Mm-hmm. There are a bunch of things that they can do. With kids, regardless of the age, assistive technology can be really helpful.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because you can customize a Kindle visually. You can customize Audible to the voice of the narrator and how fast they read.
Right.
Kindle has some really beautiful note features to help offload working memory that comes with the note taking and the executive functioning. And so that's usually where I pivot clients to, is let me take you through some coaching on some assistive technology that will give your brain space externally, to put things in a way that your mind naturally understands them, and create this external outside in context to the way you're used to thinking, and then bridge the gap between where the roadblock has just gone up.
Yeah. And one thing, I'm not a therapist here, right? I do all of our, other awesome things that make the business run. But I do see a lot of times the therapist will use like talk to text with a lot of our kiddos, which is, they say, is like immensely helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anything that takes the hands out of the equation, I say, because their handwriting, and again, it's a really nuanced suggestion back to parents and teachers, because young kids, the motor development of learning handwriting helps with certain skill development. But after a certain point, I really believe that it makes more sense to teach the kids to keyboard, speech to text, and use some of the assistive reading technologies, because then their brains can go the speed that they're accustomed to, which, begins to repair the self-esteem. Right. Because the self-esteem really takes a hit, and it is possible to recover, but it takes some of these really dry programmatic things to get kids feeling like they have what they need to do what they know their brains can do. Yeah.
And do you ever recommend like OT or, speech therapy for that? That's what we do, right? So we've got the speech therapists are trained to do dyslexia, but anything else that you recommend for those kids?
Both of those. Again, depending on the age of the kiddo, I try to push the envelope on the age that practices accept, because on that older end, if you can catch somebody that's going to be open, it really is worth a try. Yeah, because, the technologies, your eyes are helping your brain, but OT and speech, again, getting into the deep language processing and some of the sensory things, because the brain, capitulates among all those things naturally.
Right.
So to be able to pull them out and, put them in somebody's hands and say, we're going to try this because, and kids won't, I don't want to do that, or that's babyish, I'm too old for that. And so when I get that kind of a response, we have a little biology lesson, and I explain to them, let me tell you, this is something in your brain that it's happening in a piece of tissue about the size of your pinky fingernail.
Crazy.
And I said, so it's very subtle and small. All it really amounts to are these two pieces of brain gyri that are neighbors. So that, the neurons are where they should be, only they get, in some cases, they might get fused a little bit, and stuck together. And so there's this crosstalk between neurons that don't usually talk, and then other ones aren't talking. And I had one little girl say to me, "Oh, I have a webbed toe for a brain." and I said to her, "Oh, that's the bumper sticker. I have a webbed toe in my brain."
Oh my gosh.
Right. And this was a little girl she kind of looked like Pippi Longstocking. She was like on the stage, really bright and cheery. And when she came in, her mom literally was like, "Dr. K, the lights went out. We found out she has dyslexia, and the lights have gone out." And the day we had this conversation about the tissue, the size of her pinky fingernail, she bounced out, and her mom called me and said, "I don't know what you said to her, but the lights are back on." Fabulous.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I tell her story all the time, because when kids are like, "No, that I'm too old to do that," or "I don't want to do that," we have the biology lesson to kind of push back any residual shame about it and just say, it's just part of your wiring. And now that we know that wire is there that way, we can fix it. We can get in there. But you have to be on your own team. That's what I tell the kid. You have to be on your own team. Look at all these people. We're all on your team. And you to be on your own team. So that's usually the evo and into intervention world.
That is so funny. A webbed toe in my brain. Oh my gosh. And I mean, we've seen the same kind of a thing that happens where, you've got a kid that comes in and they feel that they're a little too old, but then once they get the buy-in, right? Like you said, once they're on their own team, they're like, "Oh, well, this is cool. Like, I'm into it because now I know I am smart and I can do hard things."
And things are going to start to feel better too.
Yeah.
They're not going to feel like they're getting hoodwinked in school.
Right. Exactly.
Which is a cool feeling. Yeah.
Well, I think that was my last question for you, but I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to share with us.
Yeah. Well, the web toast story, there's an editorial that I wrote for the Fairfax County Times a few years back.
Yeah.
And it's in that editorial. So I'll send you the link to that editorial.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. It's a nice follow-up to what we've been talking about with stealth dyslexia.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Well, perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been fabulous.
My pleasure.
And I know a lot of people have heard now are like hearing this and being like, "Oh my gosh, I know what to do now."
Right. Yeah. I mean, attention is such a global phenomenon, and it's influenced in every condition. Autism influences attention, specific learning disability. So I would say, if parents are struggling, their kiddo has a diagnosis of some attention disorder, but things have not gotten better. Chances are there's something deeper in the mechanism. And as I said before, I see a lot of it. It was stealth dyslexia.
Yeah. Wow. Mm-hmm. Well, again, thank you so much for being here. And thanks for doing a second episode with us. It's fabulous.
It's great. Anytime. Thank you, Tristan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to the audience for listening. Make sure to subscribe and leave us a little rating and review. It helps other folks find the podcast, and we'll chat with you next time.